I saw the opening there and saw that it was for a directorship. I was not the director in Indianapolis, and so this was a step up for me. So I wrote a letter of application and sent it off, and was surprised when I got a phone call inviting me for an interview. So I came out for an interview in spring of 1988, and one thing led to another, and they called me and offered me the job. The obvious thing that struck me when I first came on campus was the beauty of the campus was extraordinary. And there just is not much beautiful architecture in higher education in this country. It was a unified campus, and I liked that. But I also liked the fact that it was a new university. Its deepest roots go back to the 1940s, but the university was really put together in 1972. And that was just 14 years before I became interested in it. And when I got here, a lot of things needed to be done. A lot of building needed to be done, in the library in particular. And so that was a very attractive possibility for me. And the administration, when the president and the provost interviewed me for the job, said that they wanted to build up a stronger library. So they were on my side from the beginning, and that was attractive to me. It was also a Catholic university, and I was interested in it for that reason also, because this country has 230 Catholic colleges and universities, and there's no other system like that in the world. And so I wanted to work inside that system and see what I could do. A library at a Catholic university is not necessarily very different from a library at a secular university. Both have to have the whole range of human knowledge reflected in the library. And the library at a Catholic university has to support all the programs on campus, including physics and business and music and everything that's taught on campus. So in that sense, it's not different from a secular university. However, there's an imperative to build a theological collection, especially when you have a Department of Theological Studies with graduate programs. And I was particularly interested in that. I have a background in theology, so I was particularly interested in building that. So it's a slight difference, not a major difference from secular university. I didn't come into that kind of intimate contact with students that teaching faculty do, because I did do some teaching in the theology department, and in that sense, I interacted with my students, several hundred of them over the years. But as an administrator, students were something of an abstraction to me. I did things for them, and I talked to them all the time, but I never learned what their names were. I would work on the reference desk occasionally, and that would give me a kind of a more intimate contact with students, although, again, I never learned their names or had repeat visits from them very much. Well, the most important thing for a university library is to be there for its students and its faculty. So one of the things that I did when I first came on board, I think the library closed at 11 o'clock at night. We started opening until 1 in the morning. And not the whole building was open in the evening. The library on this campus is made up of 2 buildings which are connected to each other. And one of the buildings was closed down. The old building was closed down every evening. And I opened that for student use. And I opened the library until 1 o'clock in the morning. We kept expanding the hours over the years. We eventually went to 2 a.m. closing. And we, in the final years of my position here, before I retired, during exam week, we would be open 24 hours. So being open and being there for students is very important. Then you have to have a good collection for students. And we were able to put together at this university, before I came here, they put together the libraries of 2 Catholic colleges, the College for Women and the College for Men, and made a single university library out of it. Now, it needed a lot more work than that, so I was able to add about 150,000 books during my tenure as library director here, and I increased the, the librarians did this. We did it as a team. We increased the journal collection substantially. And then perhaps during the time I was here, the technological change in the world of information was so great, and we had to input that into the library as it came online. When we first automated the collection in the late 80s and early 90s, the internet did not exist yet. And that came along in the mid-90s, and we eventually put the library's catalog up on the World Wide Web and developed great connectivity with other colleges and universities so that we could borrow books from them. One of the most important things that we did was to form consortia of libraries so that we weren't just dealing with our own collection, we had access to the collections of other universities. And in the city of San Diego, we had 4 universities: University of California, San Diego State, California State University of San Marcos, and USD, the main library at USD plus the law library at USD, formed a consortium of 5 libraries. And in effect, we created a single catalog called the Circuit Catalog for all 5 libraries, and made the collections available. Had a delivery van running twice a day among the 4 campuses so that we could trade books very efficiently, and students and faculty who needed to get books could get them within 24 hours usually. We had access to, USD had access to 2 million books that it did not own, just in the city of San Diego. The University of California, San Diego, was a much larger library and larger campus, had access to 700,000 books that it did not own. So although 700,000 doesn't equate with our 2 million, it's still such a large number that it was a great benefit to UCSD to have this consortium in place also. So it was a win-win situation for all campuses. And the students and faculty used it quite a bit. Many persons at USD had a big impact on my life. I worked as a senior administrator. I worked with other administrators, and a particularly outstanding administrator was Art Hughes, who was the founding president of the university. He came in 1972 and retired in the late 1990s. He put the university together, and I learned a lot just by watching him. I had a lot of meetings I went to that he presided over, and I watched his way of operating, and I know I learned a lot of leadership values from him. And then there was Sister Fury, who was the provost for the whole first 2 decades of the university. She worked with Art to create the university as we know it. And she was a very intense worker. I reported directly to her, so I had a lot of contact with her. And she was a very serious university person. And together they built a university that had a reputation in the secular world as well as the Catholic world. And that was very important. So those 2. Tom Burke was the vice president for student affairs, and I often had lunch with him. One of the most pleasant experiences of my career at the university was having lunch with a couple of friends. Tom Burke was one of them. J.J. O'Leary was a Jesuit priest on campus. He worked in campus ministry and also taught several courses. And Sister Helen Lorch was the Sacred Heart sister of advanced years who inhabited an apartment over the top of my office in the library. And I used to accuse her of flamenco dancing on the ceiling. But she and JJ and Tom Burke and I would have lunch together frequently and discuss the development of the university in humorous fashion. I suppose my fondest memory is is meeting students. Students would come up to me when I did something like extend the hours. They would come into my office, or they would find me on campus, see me walking across campus, recognize me, and come up to me and thank me for it, and say how important it was to them to do that. So that was a pretty important. I knew I was doing the right thing when I got that kind of feedback. There was a particular room in the library that everybody likes better than the whole rest of the library, and that's the Mother Rosalie Hill reading room, the great reading room that was designed after the inspiration of a Spanish university building. I had many receptions in that room for faculty, and yet it was a working room. It was the silent part of the library. We had a noisy part and a silent part. We had two buildings, so we had a noisy building and a silent building. And the Rosalie Hill reading room was definitely a silent building, and students could count on the silence of the place to go and study there. It was also very attractive. And my office was right off that room, so I spent a lot of time in that room. It's very interesting that all the attempts in libraries to keep them silent, as quiet as possible, there was a lot of energy spent on that over the years. And we reversed ourselves. The whole profession reversed itself 180 degrees around 6 or 7 years ago. And we created library study spaces that were meant for students to come and talk in and exchange ideas and work on their homework together. So we put, in the reference room, we put electrical outlets all over the room where students could plug in their computers, their laptops, and often they would group around a single laptop and do group study together. It was very common, but it became very noisy. And we not only went 180 degrees on noise, we went 180 degrees on food. That was one of our innovations. We brought in machines to sell candy bars and coffee to the students and invited them to bring their lunches with them if they wanted to. And so there was a lot of food in the library during my last few years there. A lot of noise and a lot of food. And we brought in comfortable furniture. I tried to buy furniture that looked like you would see it on Masterpiece Theater in an English club setting. Leather furniture with tables and places to put your legs up on, and carpeting on the floor, and tried to turn it into a kind of a campus living room. A very strange phenomenon happened. As we computerized things, we throughout the 90s, we got access to more and more databases with periodical literature digitized in them. And we made these databases available to students wherever they could access them. They could access them in their dorm rooms. They could access them from home if they were home. Whether their home was here in San Diego or in Minneapolis, Minnesota, they could access USD library information from their homes. And yet, in spite of the ability to do that, they still wanted to use the library buildings. So the use of the library buildings went up as we digitized. And this was a surprise to us. We thought it might go the other way. This happened on virtually all campuses. So we had to maintain good library buildings on all university campuses. That's why we had to have a big public library downtown also. I came up with the expression parallel technologies. There's a book technology and there's a computer technology. And technologies can exist side by side for long periods of time. We still scratch messages on hard surfaces. We use what's called a pencil, which is a very old form of technology. And we also use a typewriter and a printer. Well, we don't use typewriters, we use printers on our word processing system. So we use pencils on the one hand that are made out of wood, and we use the printer connected to our PC. When I got here in 1988, there was a single PC in the building, a single PC. So Sister Sally Fury had set enough money aside for me to buy 5. So that was my first technological step, was to buy 5 more PCs for the building. And then throughout the 90s, we had to computerize the library catalog, and that was a major operation. And we did both libraries together, the Copley Library and the Law Library, into the same database. We always work very closely with the Law Library, as if we were one unit. And we got a lot of support from academic computing, so we put the computer librarian in academic computing to handle the online system for both libraries. When I came to USD in 1988, we just had a few $100,000 for a book budget, and when I retired, we had well over $2 million. So it did grow incrementally. There was never a year when we didn't get an increase. I had a very fortunate experience here in that I had strong administrative support throughout my whole experience, and never any cutbacks. San Diego State and the UC system had serious cutbacks as they came into the funding problems with the state government. And I was exempt from that, being private university. I didn't have an enormous amount of money to work with, but I had enough to do the job and to grow a little bit every year. So we came out on top. All libraries tend to attract staff who are multilingual. We had several Spanish-speaking staff, and we never had to look for any. They just were there. And we put together a list of all the languages of all the librarians in the circuit, those 4 universities that I mentioned before, UCSD and CSU San Marcos and San Diego State, and us. And we had like 50 languages among the librarians. So we could always get some sort of help if we needed it. But we had quite a few we had a Romanian, we had Polish-speaking Persian at one point, French, and lots of Spanish, Italian. I decided to become a librarian in the mid-70s. I was an English teacher. I had taught English for 8 years, and I was teaching at a small college in Kentucky. And I was going to work on a PhD in English, and I was going to have a pipe I was going to smoke, and I was going to have a battered old jacket with, I was going to be the typical English teacher. And then every English job that opened in the country had 300 applicants for it. There was just an overabundance of PhDs in the humanities. So I had to look for something else to do. So there was a school of library science at the University of Kentucky, and I made some inquiries, and I decided that might be a possibility for me. So I went there for a year and got a master's degree. And only to find out that when I finished the master's degree, there were hundreds of people for every job in library science as well. But I had double master's, and I had the experience of teaching, so I was able to get a college library job very easily in 1976. And I spent 3 years at a small Ohio college, and then moved on to the University of Dayton in Dayton, Ohio. I spent 6 years there and then went to Indiana University. The qualities that make a great librarian are a very broad knowledge base. The academic programs in this country, especially the PhD, are designed to help a person get a very narrow but profound, deep knowledge of a subject, of a single subject, and then to do research in that subject ever after. Librarians need something quite different from that. They need to be familiar with a broad range of knowledge. This is what the word erudition means, very broadly educated, so that you have an ability to understand a wide range of the humanities and science and the social sciences. You just end up knowing a lot about these areas, but not in any terrible depth. That's important for a librarian, because I'm speaking about public service librarians. When students come and ask you questions, the questions can be about anything under the sun. And sometimes you have to deal with subjects that you know very little about. I was always dealing with political science questions, for example, and I never had a single course in political science, but I was able to understand the bibliography of political science, so I could look stuff up relatively easily.